On March 4th, 1922, the Marble Hall of the Berlin Zoological Gardens hosted a masquerade ball to premiere F.W. Murnau's film screening. That movie was Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. The ball went off without a hitch, and yet the party was spoiled, ironically, by one uninvited guest. Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's widow. What the film's producer and movie company founder Albin Grau failed to inform Murnau of was that he was either unwilling or unable to secure the rights to adapt the novel Dracula. Thus, the unauthorized adaptation of Stoker's work drew the attention and the ire of his wife. All attempts to distance itself from Stoker's novel, changing settings and time periods, removing Van Helsing, renaming characters, a different ending entirely, even the film's title reading Nosferatu, and Count Dracula becoming Count Orlok, weren't enough to prevent German courts from ruling the movie a plagiarism. Sadly, a string of poor business decisions bankrupted the studio. Expensive costume parties at local zoos tend to have that effect. When she wouldn't receive the reimbursement she sought, Florence Stoker did the next worst thing. The order went out, not just all footage banned, but all copies burned. A woman scorned. Yet, against all odds, one managed to survive. A single copy slipped away undetected, like a thief in the night, like a bat out of hell. Having escaped into the wilds of cinema to be fruitful and multiply, to ravage the earth and hold dominion over the darkness. What forms has Orlok taken since? What grounds has Nosferatu covered? Let us see what has become of it, and what sweet music still plays for the Symphony of Horror.
Somebody out there. I let him in.
For all the people who've ever mentioned a horror film with a dreamlike quality, take it from me, that's code for one boring movie. Don't listen to them, horror fans, listen to Incubus. It is this made-for-TV film that takes trance-like dreams to their nightmarish depths. However, and ironically, this film's inclusion on this list is not because of its iconic scene, but rather has everything to do with the figure whose image looms over the box cover every bit as its presence looms over the film. The same year Alien debuted in theaters, and over a decade before Pennywise terrorized childhoods on TV, this Stephen King miniseries beat The Dancing Clown to the punch on the small screen. Interesting trivia note: despite the bluish appearance of the cosmetics, the color applied to the monster is actually gray, which goes to show how important lighting is on film. Regardless, judging by this paint job, it would not have come as any shock if Tom Savini had worked on the makeup, as it is reminiscent of the zombie effects from Dawn of the Dead. The anemia of the skin is matched by the intensity of the eyes. We're so accustomed to seeing our vampire fangs protrude from the canines that when they extend from the incisors, it appropriately evokes a rodent-like expression befitting of its ancestry.
So it seems you've discovered your unpleasant nature.
You are confused, aren't you? Frightened.
This just goes to show that the genre does not need to be horror or even take place in some old world village. The spider-like reach of Nosferatu can extend into sci-fi noir of a Depression-era metropolis. This is the first mention on our list where we're discussing villains that aren't themselves vampiric, but it won't be the last. I remember even believing them to be the immortal damned once seeing them floating in the film's trailer. Make no mistake, short of a time-traveling DeLorean to take us to 1920, if audiences were petrified by the silent film classic as much as modern filmgoers were by the chilling eeriness exuded by the strangers, then the Count certainly hasn't lost his edge over the years. They don't have to bare teeth or suck your blood, but the inhuman unease that fills the screen when they're on the scene is due in no small part to their ghostly, chalky skin and callous eyes. Peering into their gaze appears to reflect a cold, calculating sentience where a soul should be, or once was. The term Uncanny Valley refers to the theory that robots appearing almost human will risk eliciting cold, eerie feelings in viewers. Have you ever seen that phenomenon in an entire species? I don't know what makes for a more disturbing prospect. The fact that they have stranger children amongst their ranks, or their downright blood-curdling imagery of their... Of all the eye-rolling times I've ever heard of vampires as a disease or an offshoot of humans, it's as if this film redeemed that very premise, while also undermining it. These troglodytes repurposed primitive humans into a nocturnal subspecies which are not vampires. That's the brilliance behind these carnivores. Their biology is totally plausible. The blind eyes, the echolocation in the cave dwelling, the heightened senses, the thirst for blood. They are as if natural selection took a rather twisted turn on the evolutionary ladder and sired feral beasts out of cavemen. The sheer ferocity of the natives sees them jump the food chain from bat to shark, given their jaws are so lethally fit for the job of killing machines. The glazed-over eyes are unsettling to say the least, not to mention the clicking noises used to hunt by sound. These are the only proper animals on this list, and are every bit the predator as the most lethal hunters of the wild. The grainy muck on their faces was indicative of their surroundings, almost as if they emerged from the mud or the cave walls.
As Neanderthals are to human beings, the Tulakan are to vampires. They're a primordial, ferociously powerful killing machine, as single-minded as animals. They are the vampires that vampires fear. An ancient and entirely different race, and until this morning I thought they were a myth.
Similar to the film Legend, where the minions of the Netherworld could be trolls, it was a thought-provoking twist to make the minions belched forth from the Hellmouth to be vampires, but in their purest form. The thought of the Neanderthals of the vampire race is certainly a pulse-pounding notion, which is probably how they prefer it. From their feral movements and tattered leather clothing, they indeed come off like a nightmare from a more primitive age. The serpentine eyes and enlarged canines make these monstrosities a terror to behold. These, though, were the Orlok threat to close the show in its final season. As for the big bad of Season 1, we have the appropriately named Master. The pink nose and lips and red eyes were always perfectly ghastly. For a makeup devoid of skin tone, it is nothing short of gruesome that the only color hinted at was human DNA, the sight of which ironically was enough for your own blood to run cold. His facial features appeared almost clay-like. This is impressive work for late 90s TV effects. Of all the depictions on this list, it is his that appears the most hellish. Its fiendish appearance is an affront to nature and parody of humanity. From the looks of it, this entity hasn't been human for quite some time. The master decked out leather fetish places Nosferatu in this case on par and dangerously close to a fellow haunting figure in Hellraiser. If your mind's eye can't fathom anything as harrowing as a Cenobite vampire, then look no further.
In darkness, there is strength.
Space elves are a pastime of science fiction dating back decades, so I found it refreshing that the premise of dark elves among the stars would take inspiration from vampires. Enter the Remans, the slave soldier shock trooper caste of the tyrannical Romulan Empire. This is the only time I concede and even wholeheartedly endorse the vampire as a species of science and even as an offshoot of another race. What makes these different from all others? I'm so glad you asked. It's because if you're going to take the supernatural into the science fiction, you need to bring the world that story takes place in along for the ride. Every aspect of your villains, then, needs to be reconfigured from the ground up to match their identity, not just their appearance. From their technology, their ensemble, their ship design, every aspect of the Reman species is uniquely theirs. Evil made custom built.
She's a predator.
Even the command station of their flagship appears as a gothic throne room. How much more insidious can it get for you if half your planet is literally overshadowed by perpetual night? True to form, the Reman people are nocturnal and distressed in the light. The sunken eyes encircled by grayish croc skin leaves no doubt of their malevolence. So colorless is their skin pigmentation, the only color one can spot on their face is the color of certain veins. Their fangs take on the form of needle-like teeth, and the requisite hairless craniums and pointed ears are unmistakable. To think that the Remans are the dirty little secret of an empire that is already cloak and dagger. The mind staggers at such a thought. Which reminds me. The telepathic abilities of the Vulcan are long lost to their Romulan cousins. No doubt, a mind clouded by ambition is one cut off from expansion. It was therefore a welcome sight to see this second species to have branched off, to have regained their mental faculties. Considering how far the Remans have genetically diverged from the Vulcans, one is left to wonder what use they have made of their abilities to read minds. One for meditative, another for menacing. What does a slave telepath within a world of forever nightfall have on their mind? If these are creatures that lurk in the shadows, it doesn't get any darker than the coldness of space. As a horror comedy, this film sought to showcase parodies of all classic portrayals of cinematic vampires. This eclectic band of bloodsuckers runs the gamut, starting with an 18th century dandy, the type you'd expect to read in a penny dreadful, attending galas and courting young ladies before inevitably botching a feeding. The orthodox count, hailing from an age of plunder and pillaging, hoisting fallen soldiers on wooden spikes, fit for the days of the impaler. Or, how he puts it,
I was known as Vladislav the Poker.
the unsuspecting traveler turned Lost Boys-esque rebel. For the sake of this video, though, the real star of the show is the beast in the basement. Peter is the flatmate that takes after the Orlok archetype. In keeping with the comedic renditions of the vampire genre and their depictions, the Nosferatu caricature houses overdeveloped fangs to cartoonish degrees that even when his mouth is closed, his absurdly curved fangs remain draped over his bottom lip. Talk about an overbite.
Break!
Let me get this right. You want me to hunt them? For you?
The Reaper strain of vampires were genetically designed to emulate the Daywalker strains, so that the vampire order could have Blade's hereditary advantages at their disposal. Nevertheless, as with all failed experiments, things took a turn for the carnage. As much of a fan that I'm not of demystifying the paranormal through the scientific method, the thought of a mutant variation of something that's already a monster is provocative. The Cain to his Abel, or the Cain to his Undertaker. It's like they made a genetic Frankenstein abomination out of vampires. Much like Buffy, this Blade sequel mimicked the Nosferatu blueprint twice. Damaskinos, the pureblood elder, and Nomak, the source pathogen along with his Reaper progeny. Though explained in the film, I find the bifurcated jaw superfluous, if for no other reason than it leading to less creative designs to come by the film's director. I would have liked to have seen different mutations depending on their prey that was infected. For example, a Reaper bred from a human, noticeably distinguishable from a vampire turned Reaper, while Nomak, as Patient Zero, remains the singular pureblood, a distinctive title made often throughout the film series. In that fashion, he displays two qualities of his greatest rivals: the pedigree of pure vampires and patriarchy like his father Damaskinos, and the lone wolf status like the Daywalker. In more capable hands, this oversight may have come to fruition. Considering their relegation as a contaminated strain of vampires, the subtle greenish complexion to their membrane hints at infection. Their dead blue eyes, surrounded by bloodshot veins, make them look as dreadful as they are imposing. The lightly brushed veins get their point across of their virulent nature, without excessiveness. If you're gonna go outbreak vampire, the Reaper strain drafts a proper blueprint. Just lose the predator jaw.
He's the one. The source. The first true vampire.
So the legend is true.
This underrated design is what truly brings Count Orlok out of the Dark Ages and into the 21st century. Kudos for the folding retractable wings and pinned-back pointed ears. The bat-like facial features are much more present than accounted for, and the overall profile is appropriately formidable in keeping with the action-heavy tone of the series. Marcus Corvinus is unquestionably a vampire elder that can throw down. I do love when two sides of the same coin come face to face. It gives one the unique perspective to appreciate their differences. Despite the trademark pale complexion of most members of this, let's call it ethnic group, it's the monster's penchant for blue that seems most productive. Even though Nosferatu has always sported more bat-like features than his sibling, to my knowledge, it wasn't until Underworld's sequel that an angel got its wings.
I call this tasty tidbit Mournin Mess.
It's noteworthy that even the traditional vampire servant class, the Ghoul, has also sought influence from Count Orlok. The undead in this episode give off a bone-dry facade. Not necessarily desiccated, but definitely devoid of the nourishment of life-giving blood. Their use of disguises goes hand in hand with their habitation in crypts below ground, both concealing something sinister, whether beneath the skin or below the surface. All the usual trappings are present: the bald head, the pale complexion, and pointed ears, all suitably grim and proper, especially with the female. The wrinkling around the mouth is a uniquely inspired choice and only bolsters the creep factor once they bare their crooked yellow teeth. The fact that they wear masks comparable to skin suits to walk around in daylight hours and pass for human is a nice touch and eerily macabre. A slave to appearances, it seems.
Pater noster, qui es in celi.
Before Van Helsing, before Underworld, this was the earliest example I recall seeing a vampire against a werewolf, albeit a wolf man. Up until now, with 5 previous entries under its belt, vampires never stepped foot on the werewolf's turf. Until the Freaks. By the 6th chapter, the franchise had been relegated to direct-to-video status. The fans that hung on were the cult following of all cult followings, and I, at least, can say that this was my favorite of all the Howling sequels. As this closing chapter didn't depict a typical lycanthrope with a wolf man instead of a werewolf, it only seemed fitting to portray an atypical vampire, a point I hadn't considered until scripting this video. Harker's Orlok iteration here is impressive for that year and that budget. Again, 6 films in, I'm pleased to see genuine effort go into this movie's villain. The silhouette used in his attack visual is a moniker unique to this film and its villain. The wrinkles, especially over the nose, just give this vampire the expression of snarling, even when he isn't grimacing his face at all. The blue color palette is a superb stylistic choice, and looks excellent in what little light it can capture. This is without question a signature and easily identifiable cosmetic application. The detail really pops even amidst the evening filming. The pointed dome for the cowl gives this nightcrawler an alien quality to an already grisly fiend, no doubt harkening back to Orlok's otherworldly appeal. Of all the makeup jobs I've listed, this is not only a fear-inducing design, but it ranks among my favorite on this list, and one I'd love to see resurrected in a film. And such it has been, lo these 98 years that Murnau's affront to nature has roamed free and fierce. It warms a cold heart to know that Count Orlok has survived nearly a century and his impact hasn't waned. Speaking of influence, the trope we recognize today of vampires falling prey to sunlight did not originate from Stoker's own manuscript or Dracula's own movie, but from Nosferatu. How's that for lineage and legacy? Perhaps it's appropriate that, as the plagiarism, Orlok is often treated as the mutant species to the vampire race. However, we can all agree this is one copyright infringement that we're happy survived the dawn and withstood the test of time to mold horror to this very day. It is a tale to be told and a sight to behold that both Dracula and his distant relative have endured for so long, developing separately and yet parallel. They are as if products of divergent evolution, heading in the same direction even if marching to the beat of their own drum. One for the mainstream, and the other for the underground. One who at the prime of his life and death stalked as silent as the grave. Another capable of universal appeal. Whether a symphony of horror or the sweet music they make as children of the night, these two figures have orchestrated the rhythm that you can play nightmares to. These, however, were my findings. Feel free to list your own favorite Orlok-inspired vampires. Are you a fan of Selma Hayek in From Dusk Till Dawn? Or have you played the Nosferatu clan in the Masquerade games? Perhaps Radu from Subspecies? Take to the comments section and keep the good count in company.